Okay. Yeah, well, there's some latency, so it will usually shows up. All right, we'll get started here. Hi, this is Anthony Parent of Parent and Parent LLP IRS Medic, and we have some pretty important news that came up yesterday. We had House Resolution 7358, Tax Fairness for Americans Abroad Act of 2018, a pretty exciting thing to be submitted just before Christmas. And with me is Keith Redman, someone who has been here from the beginning to see something positive like this happen. Keith, welcome. What do you say here?
Well, this is very good news that we have this bill introduced. It's been a long time coming. It's been a lot of work. It's been a lot of information and education of people up on Capitol Hill. I have to say my hat's off to Representative George Holding and his office and Matt Strauss, who is his legislative counsel, and putting this bill together. My hat's off to Solomon Ew, who is with Republicans overseas, who has been earnestly and tirelessly working on behalf of Americans overseas. And, certainly John Richardson, who you'll be hearing in a few minutes. We have come the farthest we've ever come in trying to end the U.S. imposition of its tax code on tax residents of other countries. So this getting it out into a bill and to move forward, whether it be in this Congress or moving forward in the new Congress coming up in January, is a major, major accomplishment and a major step.
Absolutely. It's just fantastic. And it's a fantastic thing to be a part of. And we're joining us today also is the great John Richardson of Citizenship Solutions. John, thank you so much again for joining us today. What do you have to say here?
Well, I think this is obviously very good news. I echo what Keith said, and I echo particularly his description of that the issue is to get the U.S. to stop imposing worldwide taxation on people who are tax residents of other countries and do not live in the United States. So we've got a major step in that direction. I emphasize it's a major step. I think it's phenomenal that after 150 years, we've actually had a bill introduced into Congress. But it's not this certainly isn't the beginning, and it's definitely not the end. But as a great person in history said, I think this may be the end of the beginning, and we move forward from here.
That's right. Oh, yeah. So now, Keith, why don't you go over a little bit of the nuts and the bolts of the proposals as you understand it so far?
Well, the way it looks right now, and John, please interject at any time, is that with this particular bill, any non-U.S. sourced income will not be taxed by the United States, provided that you have 3 back years of tax compliance, meaning that you've been in the system or are going to be in the system for the past 3 years. And what that means is that once that is accomplished, moving forward, so for example, if you're an American overseas living in France, you would just fill out a form moving forward to say, hello, I'm still a tax resident of France, and that's it. And you don't have to do all the filings or anything that has been done before in regards to this bill. So that is something major and when it comes to this bill.
Yeah, and I think it's major. And this is exactly something I wanted to see because as we've been commenting, with the tax reform, it took international taxation and it made it worse. And, what we find is so many people say, they won't comply, that they're looking at this to say, well, why would I want to enter the U.S. tax system when I know it to be so utterly insane? I
think another thing, Anthony, I'm sorry, forgive me for interrupting, but especially for your Homeland American audience, it's important to be repetitive on this, is that it's not a question of not wanting to pay taxes as American overseas, because you do pay tax where you live, whether it be France, Germany, UK, Austria, Japan, etc. Yep. And the major problem has been is that these countries' tax systems are so different than what the U.S. tax system is that it has created major problems. And even with the tax treaties that have been in place, there is this myth that it stops double taxation, and it does not.
No,
it
right.
does not stop double taxation. So having this type of bill will be very good for many, many Americans living overseas.
That's right. There's myriad ways that double taxations can occur if you live overseas, and the people are paying taxes. All that where this is really doing is getting the U.S. to be more in line with the way the rest of the world taxes. If you live somewhere else, you should. If you're a tax resident somewhere else, you should be a tax resident another place too, the place that you're not living. That's really what this is doing. And I would just say that this will so much help out everybody. And it's really one of the things, as John has mentioned before, some of the biggest victims of FATCA and some of this international taxation is the IRS, because they simply don't have the resources to get involved with all of these things. And the money really isn't there. These people who live overseas, a lot of times, those thousands of dollars for tax returns for $100 in taxes. It's just not worth it, but still they have to do it. Otherwise, they're subjected to terrific penalty regimes. And so here's the good thing is that if you've done a streamlined disclosure so far, you're basically ready to go. If this passes, you are going to check off and you are going to be done. Every year you're just going to certify, hey, I'm not here. I don't have to do any of this stuff. Now, and I feel that, we've talked about how many people are overseas, 7 to 8 million U.S. persons overseas. But if you actually look up the amount of people who use the federal income exclusion and foreign tax credit, the number of filers is under 1 million, well under 1 million. So we kind of have this situation where, we know there's millions of overseas, yet somehow we have less than 1 million, also filing FBARs, also in filing the foreign income exclusion. So there's a big gulf there between the level of compliance. This is only going to increase compliance because now it gives the taxpayers overseas light at the end of light at the end of the tunnel. If I do this, I can eliminate my problems. Whereas before, if I do this, I might not eliminate my problems because the IRS might just sort of continue. So it's just a huge. And I think it's just that we've never seen anything like this. This is the first time anything even close to this has ever been proposed, ever in Congress. This is amazing and amazing work. And by the way, guys, yes, it was Republicans overseas that submitted this, but this has bipartisan support. This is not a Republican issue. This is not a Democrat issue. This is an American issue. This is an American issue of fairness. So anything else that you want to mention about the nuts and bolts of the proposal as you see it now?
I think, just one last point on the proposal. For those individuals who are Americans overseas, and there is a small bucket of those who are more comfortable staying under the current tax regime, they have that option. You can opt in for this new proposal that's being proposed, or you can decide to stay the way you are. And that is a choice that you can make. So it's not, there is that option. And I think that's important to state.
So let's talk about, you help out a lot of accidental Americans. So what about them? Is this who you're talking about?
Well, no, I'm talking about people, there are Americans overseas who have retired overseas. And that particular bucket may want to stay in the current tax regime versus being into the new proposed tax regime.
But it gives so they have an option. So for some people, they actually might want to stay where they are, and then for other people, they may opt into this new one. And for a lot of people, I would imagine. Right,
and the majority of Americans overseas are Americans who live overseas permanently. They're not on quote unquote expat assignments for 3 or 4 years where they'll be returning to the United States. That's not the case at all. These are people who are embedded in their countries of residence, and that's why this particular proposal is going to be very important to them. Now, you had mentioned accidental Americans, and I think that's going to be it probably warrants a little bit of a discussion with John on this part, is that those accidental Americans who wish to retain U.S. citizenship, this gives them that option to do so. Now, in Now, I must say that the majority of accidental Americans do not wish to retain U.S. citizenship, but those who do, they have this particular option. John, I don't know if you would like to, talk a little bit further about that particular bucket of individuals who are affected.
Yeah, my view of this vis-a-vis the accidentals, I think overlaps with yours to some extent, but perhaps differs a little bit in that I think I'm more inclined to see this as a possible opportunity for accidentals because, I do recognize that the vast majority of them are not in the tax system. And, I think that makes sense in their situation. They were supposed to be in the tax system. But for a lot of those people, let me pose you the following question. If we agree, I think that, for example, Germany would be a good citizenship, a good passport. If somebody were to come to you and say, you know what, you can basically openly have German citizenship and a German passport if you do a 3-year, back tax filing, and then all you have to do from that point on is sign an annual declaration that you're not going to do a tax filing anymore. Would you want German citizenship under those circumstances? And I think that a lot of people might. Not everybody would, but some might. So I think that for a lot of the accidentals who are not in the system, I think that they may very well see this as an opportunity to, openly be able to, get an American passport and, have that as a possible opportunity. I mean, sort of like an old ad for, I'm old enough so that I remember an old ad for Camel Filter cigarettes. It was Camel Filter. They're not for everybody, but they could be for you. And, I think for a lot of the accidentals, maybe they'll think U.S. citizenship. It's sure not for everybody, but maybe it could be for me.
Right. I think, that you raise a good point there. And I think, I've been getting a number of calls from accidental Americans where they do have some key concerns. And this is nothing to disparage the hard work of entering this bill because, it's not the entire enchilada, but it's a big part of the enchilada. I like Mexican food, so that's why I like to call it that. But I know one key concern of accidental Americans, and maybe we can talk about that, is that, okay, let's say accidental American, and I use France just because that's my second country, does 3 years of back tax compliance, and they have investments, and there are some key taxes in France which are not recognized by the IRS. If it comes down to that they have to pay tens of thousands of dollars to enter the U.S. tax system, they're not going to be willing to do that. They might be willing to do it if it's just a nominal amount or no amount whatsoever to move forward. And I think that's a major concern. A number of those accidental Americans.
And for a lot of them, what you always can do is run some simulations to see what's involved. There's a lot of surprises, but I think that you would definitely want to get a price. You want to know the total price of what it's going to cost, including any fees associated with your tax professional and your tax due before doing that, which would be possible. John, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that we ought to really make that point in very simple terms, very simply. Nobody should enter the U.S. tax system without knowing what it's going to cost them to do so.
There you go. Yeah.
Not only just cost them today, but cost them moving forward.
Well, that's right. That's right. And in the past, one of the problems with coming into tax compliance, and I'm sure Anthony would verify in spades, because I know you work with these people directly, has always been what I call, it's one thing to come into tax compliance, but you got to do it in a way that you can actually maintain it, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Right.
So, on a year after year basis. So, it doesn't do you any good to come into tax compliance in a methodology, filing various forms if there's no way it's sustainable down the road, for these accidentals. And so I think that, my, sort of soft advice, or I don't want to put it that way.
Yeah,
I think we ought to think
there's no legal advice on this video, by the way.
No, obviously. What I think we ought to think about is, there's a huge difference between I'm going to start filing taxes on what it actually means. I really think they have to understand in their situation what it means. For most of them, I think it's probably more of an opportunity for most of them.
It sounds that way. It really does. That, if you're trying to if you're trying to get another passport around the world, and if you're a U.S. citizen, you're trying to get another passport around the world, you're going to pay, a lot of money for one that isn't all that good, and it might be impossible to get one that is good. Or very, very difficult. So the fact is, having a second passport is known as being incredibly valuable. This act, or this outline of it, gives me incredible hope that once again that U.S. passport, and this is what I remember Solomon saying when we had him on, it's like, you know what, this U.S. passport is supposed to be the best thing in the world, man. This is supposed to be it. And now this bill, it's going to make it that way. This is it. Yes, this U.S. passport is the thing to have, because it's not necessarily going to throw you into the world's worst tax regime imaginable. So that's what's really I like to see. Like, okay, finally, that we're actually seeing some people get it, that the current system is just destroying what it means to be a U.S. citizen. And the people, now maybe if you live in the U.S., you're not so aware of it. But let me tell you something, you go outside the U.S., everyone who knows a little bit about the U.S. knows just how awful it is, and it diminishes the value of that U.S. brand. This Tax Fairness for Americans Abroad Act of 2018, I think it's going to bring that way back up, and that's how I see it. Keith, do you agree?
I do. I think it's high time that we transition the U.S. passport from being an albatross that is just suffocating individuals to something that one can be proud again to have. That's very important. And for the accidental Americans, sure. I mean, it gives them an opportunity, provided that they can do their due diligence to see what that present value and future value will be based on what that 3 years of tax compliance may look like.
Right. Yeah. And that's
now,
something
that also, yeah,
and
that
that's
also
something
goes for
we
Americans
could,
overseas who need to come into tax compliance too. Sorry. Just wanted to interject that as well.
We help a lot of people overseas, figure out stuff before they make a move. We help them figure out, and if they decide to do something else, that's their business. It's none of my business. And I do think people really need to know, because there are a lot of surprises, and you got to run the analysis. And things a lot, but I mean, it works both ways, because so many times, I can't tell you how many calls I get where people are assuming it's the end of the world for them. Oh my God, I screwed up beyond belief, and it's the end of the world for me. And oh my God, I don't know what I'm going to do. And then we find out, actually, no, you have a really simple issue. You were just given bad information, or you misunderstood it, or somebody actually intentionally misled you in order to, I don't know what they're doing. So, John, what do you think? Do you think this is going to make the U.S. passport worth something more than it is today?
Well, of course, it would make the U.S. passport worth more than it is today. That part's a no-brainer. I think the more interesting question, though, bringing this back to the actual bill, is how far does it go and what does it mean? And I think that a couple of points I want to make here. The thing I like about it, and I really do like it, is that it's mindlessly simple. Okay, at least in comparison to a number of the proposals that have been previously floated. But I also would make all it does is simply retains everything that's existing, and essentially just creates, for those who want to opt into it, a massive foreign earned income exclusion, that includes pretty much everything, and that's it. So it's very, very good, I think, on the issue of what is the income that is being taxed. What's not addressed here, as many people have pointed out, is the issue of the information returns. And
the information returns, John, you
Yes.
might want to explain what that means.
I mean, as Anthony would know, business, for many American tax returns, it's the information returns that are the bigger burden. And, then we've got issues, that are, beyond the scope of this call, that are far more technical. But this is it's a very, very good move. Okay. And what's good about it is that I think it provides a wonderful framework for moving forward, a wonderful framework for discussion. I mean, I don't know who would not support this based on the title alone, Tax Fairness for Americans Abroad. But there is a lot of stuff that has to be worked out, and this is a work in progress. It's also not clear, and this is playing the longer game, how this stuff would interact with issues like FATCA and FBAR and things like that. That, in all practical purposes, involve the non-U.S. bank thing and that sort of stuff. Now, what is required to move forward? And I think a lot is required. And at the same time, I think that we should be celebrating a major victory. This is the first sort of legislative recognition of this as a problem. And also, I want to make it very, very clear that although, I think Republicans overseas is the most visible proponent of this, there is no question that ACA, American Citizens Abroad, and other groups have played a major role in this. I also would like to publicly thank Jackie Boonyoung, who was involved with ACA for many years, and I believe that her fingerprints are all over this, even though she's been retired for some years, and that gives you some sense of the amount of time that people have been working on this. But what's required now, and I think this is critical, is two things. And none of this has to do with U.S. Congress. The first is that all of these groups have got to unite and come together behind the principle that tax reform is absolutely essential for Americans abroad. And again, I like the title of the bill, but everybody's got to come together, emphasizing this is in no way a partisan issue. That's the first thing. In other words, people have to unite. But the second is this, and I've had this discussion with Keith sort of privately, but I'm going to introduce it, I think, into this more public forum because I do have strong feelings about this. And without wanting to offend anybody in particular, I think that Americans abroad have been part of the problem in slowing the progress here. And the reason is this, that in my opinion, individual Americans affected by this have not been willing to get behind a general principle of tax reform, that they're going to support tax reform because it harms their neighbor, something harms their neighbor, even if it doesn't harm them. Too many people have been taking the position that, well, if it doesn't affect me, it's not an issue, therefore I'm not going to be a vocal advocate for tax reform for Americans abroad. And individuals have absolutely got to get together at this point and collectively understand that this is actually, in my view, a human rights issue. It's a major injustice, and they have got to get together to support the principle of remedying this massive human rights issue. They have to care about the harm that their neighbors are suffering, even if they're not being harmed individually. And I believe that is a necessary condition to getting this thing over the top.
Absolutely, John. We are all Americans on here. There's no Republicans, there's no Democrats. We are all Americans, and this might, it doesn't affect a large percentage of Americans, but it's a large number. It is a large number, and the people that call us, so many times you find people in horrible situations where they feel hopeless. And if we're going to disclose information, here's a disclosure for you. Do you know how many people I talked out of suicide? Do you know how many?
Yeah. Yes.
It's real.
I have as well. Yes, it is.
Right. This is how bad it is. They have no option, and they feel trapped. And sometimes their fears are misplaced. It's always misplaced. Suicide's never the answer. And sometimes there's just an awful no-win situation. And this provides a win for everybody. If you actually look at the revenue the U.S. generates from Americans abroad, it's not that much. It really isn't all that much. It's really not worth the headaches to the IRS that has, the smaller budget and the smaller resources and got to make do with less. And these are the most complicated examinations that can be done. I was reading an article, not that I agreed with a lot of the sentiment of the article, but it was an article on ProPublica where they were interviewing an ex-IRS agent who was in charge of auditing offshore disclosures. And she said something that I know to be true, and actually she undershot it a little bit. She said these audits are we got a question in here, and I think that we did answer it earlier. I just want to introduce, we have a question from Arn Petter Kolderup. He wants to know how this will affect accidental Americans. We did just discuss that a few minutes ago. So that this is generally a good idea. I just want to answer his question real quick. So generally, if you're an accidental American, you can kind of do what you want to do, or if you want to do basically a streamlined disclosure for 3 years of compliance, now you can opt out of the U.S. tax system. There are going to be some things that are up in the air we don't know the answers to, but this is generally a very good thing. And as we mentioned,
and to do a simulation, Anthony, and to do a simulation of that streamlined disclosure, so that accidental American can take a look at what it's going to look like for him or her.
Right. And
then that way they can make an educated decision.
That's right. So for those joining us live right now, I have Keith Redmond and John Richardson, and we are talking about the Tax Fairness for Americans Abroad Act and where it is. So we are talking about being united, and that the if you want to know, and we have some terror stories out. You'll see some people we've interviewed on our channel about some people and the difficulties they have about getting into compliance, just because so many of the costs are so high. And here's another one too: when you have someone who lives in a country where, like, say, the Philippines. Okay, the Philippines. The exchange rate is not really all that favorable. That Filipino peso, there's a lot of pesos that go into $1. And so if maybe you're living okay, maybe your lifestyle in Philippines is okay, you're living sort of a middle-class lifestyle. Well, now you're just like, oh man, I need to get into compliance. Let me call up a U.S. tax professional. Well, a lot of the best U.S. tax professionals are going to be in the U.S., and we have U.S.-based costs. So that when you're hiring us to do your return, not only are we kind of expensive, but you're also in a position where your exchange rate is kind of killing you and really, really making it your year-to-year tax compliance just rather insane when you're really not making a lot of money in U.S. dollars, at least. And that's something that's sort of lost on a lot of people, just the compliance work to get these forms together, and a lot of times just to prove to the IRS, hey, by the way, I have no tax due. Here, I just spent $4,000 on my return just to prove to you I had no tax due. So that's really a lot of the fairness that we're talking about. Now, in the video description below, Keith, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I just want to interrupt because you had said that we are live.
Yes.
And I think it would, my followers, if you will, would be very disappointed if I did not ask this question and put it on the table.
All right.
Let me preface what I'm about to say is I acknowledge, and I think we all acknowledge, that this bill is a step in the right direction. It's not the whole enchilada, but it's a big part of it. Having said that, I know a number of Americans overseas are concerned about the unearned non-U.S. income, whether that be PFIX or any type of other assets like a home, et cetera, capital gains, et cetera. How would that be addressed? Because I know that's a concern. If John, do you have any thoughts on that?
I will give the best answer that I can. And given that it's a very simple bill that's long on generalities and short on detail, nevertheless, in a nutshell, what the bill says is that if it's foreign source income, it's going to be excluded from U.S. taxation. Okay? So the question, it's not making a distinction between earned and unearned income the way the old rules were. So one simply asks the question, as I interpret it, is it foreign source? And if so, by foreign, I mean non-U.S. Is it non-U.S. source? Okay, if the answer is it's non-U.S. source, then it would be excluded. Now, the questions, the follow-ups, well, what does that mean for CFCs, PFIC, things like that? And the answer, my view of this is that those things absolutely first, plain and simple. Same thing with foreign pensions. The capital gains provision of this thing the way I understand them, really operate to say, to the extent that the gain is accrued or is attributable to a time that the person is overseas, the U.S. would not tax that gain on a sale. So it appears to be a situation that would allow people to continue living outside the United States. At the end of the day, there's got to be some integration, though, between two general areas. The first, what happens when they return to the United States, if they do.
Should they return, correct.
If they return, what would happen then? And the second is that on the whole expatriation issue, were they to renounce U.S. citizenship, how might these rules affect possible deemed gains? I don't have answers to those particular questions.
Yeah, and I would say for a lot of people considering renunciation, you might want to really hang on to see what happens, because who knows? And I would say this, if it's going to continue to, if it's going to tax, if earned income is not reportable, but unearned income is, I would say the bill is useless, because the earned income is the easiest part. You have your foreign income exclusion. Yeah. You have your foreign tax credit. That part's easy. That's not that hard. It's Form 1116. It's not that hard at all. It's really the other things that get really onerous when you have a foreign pension. I mean, just your retirement account, when you're investing in investments in mutual funds, which is pretty common, right? These are the things that just trigger an unbelievable amount of compliance that's just disproportionate to the possible revenue.
Anthony, if we look at those areas, it seems pretty clear that as the bill stands now, that those things cease to be problems, at least from a tax point of view. Okay, because remember, PFIC stands for Passive Foreign Investment Corporation.
Right.
And the CFC stands for Controlled Foreign, Corporation. So I think that those things have been taken care of, but there's two key areas where we'll just have to see how this rolls out. The first is coming back to the information reporting. Okay, so it's one thing to say these things don't have to be taxed, but what's not clear, and this is not a criticism. In fact, I think it's much better to break these issues off, right? Because you'd never be able to get an initial bill in if you had to deal with all this stuff at once. But, there is the issue of the information reporting, and to some extent, there's a certain amount of Treasury discretion on that, and some not, but that's an issue. But the second area that, is perhaps a little bit overkill for this call, but I can see this becoming a major issue in getting this thing through, is on the whole CFC thing. Who's a United States shareholder for the purpose of determining whether something qualifies as a controlled foreign corporation to begin with. Because you can be a U.S. citizen, perhaps not taxable on subpart F or guilty type of income, but the fact that you're a United States shareholder still contributes to making the overall corporation a CFC, right? So, that's another interesting, albeit more technical area that needs to be considered. There's a lot of stuff here.
So what you're saying, John, is people should really subscribe to this channel, because we're going to be talking a lot about this, getting the details out. And I see that we're up on time, but I do see our friend Arn asked a follow-up question, and I think this is a good way to summarize sort of where we are. The follow-up question is, thanks for answering my question. Answering it, I have a follow-up question. Keith has early advised accidental Americans to stay out of the system, so I'm very nervous to file, even if it's 3 years. And I would say, you know what, maybe just hold off. We don't need to make any decisions now, because we don't know what's going to happen. If you did want to get an idea of what it's going to cost, it's something we could always do for you ahead of time if it goes so you hit the ground running.
I would hold off, period. I would hold off everything until there's clarity on where this is going.
And that goes for the accidental American, and that also goes for the American overseas who has not been in the U.S. tax system, is to just be cool right now and see how this progresses.
That's right. Let's not make any moves. And also, here's the other thing. in the description below, you're going to see a few links to an article of a press release of Solomon Yu that's on IRS Medic, and also another link that has the social media contacts of a lot of the big players here. So, again, here's the first thing. Stay united, okay? I don't care if you're Democrat. You know what? You love President Trump for this issue because you want him to sign in the bill. You love him. You love him huge, okay? Because you want him to sign this issue. After he signs this, you can say whatever he wants, but as it is right now, you love him. Let's stay united on this. You don't have to love him. You can tolerate him. How about that? How about that? We'll go there.
That might be going too far for some people. Anthony,
try to pretend to tolerate him, okay? Try that because he is the one who is going to sign the relief that we seek. We got to do this. We got to play a little smart here. So follow that below. And with that, I want to thank you guys so much, and I want to thank everybody. And we've had so many guests on here who've helped out. I know I'm going to leave names out. Solomon, Suzanne. I mean, just so many people. Karen Alpert. Oh my God, she's brilliant. So many brilliant, hardworking people who have they're giving of themselves. They're not getting paid for this. They're just going out and doing this. You know why? Because it's the right thing to do. And Congress should do the right thing. But they're only going to do the right thing if we stay united to tell them to do the right thing.
Here's the funny thing, Anthony. Yep. I just want to share one thing. I just want to call out a few other people.
Sure, absolutely.
We've had people who have been forced to renounce their citizenship, and they are still fighting.
Yes,
we have people like Donnelly Nelson. We have people like Daniel Kutel, who is a U.S. military veteran who was forced to renounce, and he's still part of this fight. We have so many people who just want to see this through because it's the right, correct thing to do.
That's exactly right. Okay, so be sure to subscribe. There's going to be updates coming. This is such a huge, huge, unprecedented, incredible that this has just gotten introduced. I'm so excited for 2019. This is Anthony Parent of Parent and Parent LLP. Oh, John, you go ahead. I didn't ask for your closing thoughts. John, go ahead.
I don't have a closing thought. I have a closing comment, okay? I'd like to actually thank you for running your videos.
Thank you.
Yes.
The education. I think that you deserve some thanks here, Anthony.
Well, thank you. I love doing this.
Absolutely. This has been a very good forum.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it, guys. And it's just been an honor to be surrounded by such fine people. So with that, please, this is Anthony Parent of Parent and Parent LLP IRS Medic, and I thank you for watching.
Call recording.
Okay. All right. We're clear? That was freaking awesome.
Good.
This is freaking awesome. I can't believe it, to tell you the truth, that this happened. I mean, this is amazing. It really is.
Well, it's the beginning, okay? I mean, it's a great moment, but make no mistake, now the hard work begins.
I used to smoke Camel Unfiltered. You know why? Because they